Good morning and welcome viewers. Welcome to the CEC live lecture session. Today in this series we are taking English subject and our today's series is Pedagogy of English Language. Today's topic in this series is teaching of grammar, and to discuss this topic with us in studios we have Dr. Praveen Sharma. Dr. Praveen Sharma is an associate professor in Hindu College of Education, Sonipat. She has a 32 years of experience in English teaching. She also has penned down so many books on English and pedagogy of English. Dear friends, let me remind you again that if you have any questions regarding this ongoing lecture, you can call us on our toll-free number, that is 1800-110-430 in the last 10 minutes of this lecture. So without wasting further time, I would welcome Dr. Praveen Sharma to the studios and I would request her to please continue with the lecture. Madam, please continue and welcome.
Thank you, Seema ji. Good morning, viewers and listeners. In this session today, in the series of Pedagogy of English Language, we will be discussing teaching of grammar. Yes, what do we mean by grammar and what is the need of learning a grammar? What is the rule of grammar? These are some queries before us, and what is the need of using the grammar portion in day-to-day communication and in formal teaching. So these are some queries before us and I would like to answer all these queries step by step, slowly and gradually. We will be discussing all the aspects related to grammar, how much grammar a teacher should know while teaching in a formal setting, and what is the role of or importance of learning grammar while we are communicating in day-to-day life. So, if we talk about learning of grammar, it is said by Dryden that who climbs the grammar tree distinctly knows where noun, verb and participle grow. What do we mean by this statement given by the great educationist Dryden, meaning by who learn how to use the grammar will definitely try to know what is the meaning of noun, where to use noun and where to use verb, and how do we use the participle. The ultimate aim of every language teacher is to acquire the ability to speak and write the language correctly. In order to do this, he or she requires knowledge of grammar in some form or the other. Hence, any course in language teaching assigns an important role to grammar. The aim of English teacher is to make the students aware, to make them familiar how to speak correct English and how to write correct English. So one has to adhere to the rules set by the authority, and those principles, those rules, those aims, those maxims, they are derived by the great educationists, the grammarians, after a careful study, long observation and experimentation. So one has to know, and here in this session today we'll discuss how much grammar is needed and how do these rules are set. These are set by the authorities, by the grammarians after a long study. So in order to do this, one requires knowledge of grammar, and we will discuss how much grammar, because if we talk about how much grammar and what is the need of learning a grammar, to some it is a set of rules and regulation one has to use, and for some it is just the way how to use English language. So we'll see what do we actually mean by it. As teacher of English, we need to know what is grammar and how should we teach grammar, because we are not the native speakers of English language, and today in particular when we are talking about learning a language, we are talking in reference of learning English language, which is studied as a second language or as a foreign language, and it has become lingua franca between the speakers of the diverse language. So in case of our mother tongue Hindi language, the exposure of the language is there in our surroundings. So, one tries to imitate the language without knowing the basics like noun and pronoun and adjectives and other grammar participle parts of the Hindi language, because before going to school, before entering the school, a child learns how to use different sentences and different words. But in case of English language, it depends how much exposure a child is getting to that language. So, how much grammar and how should we teach grammar? We have to follow set rules and set maxims. So, before we come to know what are the types of grammar and what are the techniques and strategies of teaching grammar and what are the exercises and activities a language teacher can use at junior level or senior level, and how to organize these kind of activities, by using which activities, by using which techniques and approaches one can teach the students that these are the basics of the grammar and one has to adhere to it. So, let us discuss what is grammar. You know, the meaning of the term grammar has been given differently by different people, because to some it is something that helps in learning a language, and to others it is a body of rules and regulations of a language. So, when there are different opinion about what is grammar and what is the concept of grammar and how much grammar we should use and what is its need, what its place, what is its importance, because to some it is just a body of rules and regulation, and for some people opine that when we are just communicating or in day to day life conversation, what is the need of grammar? Because these days we are talking more of the functional language, where if one is applying the grammatical portion in a incorrect manner, then also it is accepted. We will be talking about this functional aspect later on, but for the time being, my dear friends, my dear listeners, when we are talking about the learning of a second language, learning of a foreign language, that is the English language, you know, we have to see what are the rules which are set by the grammarians, which are set by the authorities. You know, we can describe it as a descriptive science which describes the structure of sentences, function of words and their relation to one another, and the acceptability of a usage depends upon notions and norms of grammar being followed by its users. How one aspect becomes a set of rules when it is set by the authorities, and most of the users or speakers of that particular language start using those norms and those notions, then it becomes the rule. So, it depends on the users or the speakers of the language, because sometime how the speakers of a particular language use a particular word according to their use and according to their geographical area, the changes in the pronunciation of the words and its uses takes its place. Earlier to it, when we were talking about the functions of language, I talked to you what are the dialects and what are the sub dialects and how the language gets is changing shape in the present scenario by the users, by the speakers, how they use is, because how do we use the language? It is influenced by so many aspects, belief of the teacher, attitude of the teacher and attitude of the speaker, or the passion and the hard work and persistency and consistency of the learner, how much passion we have. You know, I have been talking to you in my other lectures also. It depends on the individual's great effort, how much effort we put in, how much passion we have in learning a language. And when we are the learners of language, we have to be particular about those norms and notions and how they become the rules, because they are set by the grammarians, by the authority, and one has to use those notions and norms and it becomes the rule. And What do we mean by grammar? It has been defined variously by different educationists. One of the great educationists, that is Chapman, has defined grammar, that grammar is the study of language by specialists made in order to establish the rules and principles which are followed more or less unconsciously or instinctively by the native speakers. We have to follow, we have to imitate the native speakers of a particular language if we want to learn that language, because your language teacher, maybe me or anybody, is not the correct standard of that particular language. To follow the correct notion, correct imitation, we have to imitate and we have to follow the native speaker. That is why when we talk that there are 4 skills of learning a language, that is listening, speaking, reading and writing. In that category, we first put the importance of the listening skill, because to learn a language, first a child has to listen how those particular words or the grammar aspects are being used by the native speakers. So, it becomes a principle when the notions, they are used by the native speakers. So, one has to follow or one has to imitate those patterns of grammar unconsciously or consciously which are used by the native speakers. And further, Thompson and White, they opined that the fact of language arranged under certain categories and deals only with what can be brought under general laws and stated in the form of general laws. How particular notion of using a language becomes a law when it is used by the or when it is set by the authorities, then it becomes the standard laws, and one user or one learner or one speaker of that particular language, when start following those laws, they try to imitate that language. Further, Dr. West opined that grammar is not a code of rules. It is like etiquette and the manners, a statement of convention. It summarizes what is done by cultured people, and like etiquettes, it is a constant change. Earlier to it, when we were talking about the meaning of grammar or the concept of grammar, I spoke to you a few seconds before that to some people it is just a code of conduct, and for some people they feel that our basic idea is to convey the basic thought what are lying in our mind to the other listener who is just in conversation with us. So, it is not a code of conduct, right? Rather, Dr. West has called that this grammar portion is like etiquette and table manners which are required very much, and a state of convention. It summarizes what is done by cultured people, the educated people, how the literate people, or we call them the elite class, how these cultured people have started using that particular aspect, particular grammar, and it becomes an etiquette for the other person, that when a cultured person or more educated, more literal person is using that kind of grammar portion, it is like an etiquette and one has to follow. For example, if students are listening the teacher in the class, how a teacher is using that particular word, particular structure, particular grammar aspect, it becomes mannerisms for the students to follow that particular way. So, according to modern linguistics, grammar is a device that specifies the infinite set of well-formed sentences and assigns to each of them one or more structural descriptions. In other words, grammar tells us what the possible sentences of a language are and provides a description of them, because before we move to the various approaches how to teach grammar, and what are the techniques of organizing the grammar activities in the classroom, it becomes essential for us to understand what do we actually mean by grammar and what is its importance and how the educationists have defined the role of grammar. Because if we want to teach our students a foreign language, English language, then we have to learn the grammar portion, whether it is a noun, it is a pronoun, it is adjective or participle, and what are these morpheme and phoneme. So, these or syllables or the other correct mechanisms of reading or other mechanisms of writing, we have to learn ourselves, and it is our duty, foremost duty, to make students aware and familiar with this grammar portion. Now, after knowing what is the meaning of grammar and what are the definitions given by other educationists and what are the various notions about the grammar, we will like to discuss why study grammar. Because when earlier to this I was speaking to you that basically language is for communication. If we go in depth and we try to answer the questions what for language is, language has the foremost important objective, that is the communication only. Why, suppose we are sitting in a meeting or in a formal or informal setting, there are more than 2 or 3 persons, we cannot sit silent, communication must go on. So, for that we need language, any language. So, language has the foremost important goal or objective or function, that is the communication. So, some people have their opinion, when the communication is the whole objective of a language, then why study grammar? Because if we are talking about the foreign language, the whole of the life of a child is spent in learning the complicated rules of grammar, and the result is the child is rarely becomes fluential in speaking English language or the foreign language in comparison to his or her own regional language or the mother tongue, because the one is involved in learning the complicated rules of grammar. Even then we have to discuss why study grammar. Traditional teachers of English considered grammar as an integral part of language curriculum, because earlier we used to emphasize on the translation method or grammar translation method. What was that? If we have to teach any aspect, any passage, we will be translating whole of the passage in mother tongue. That is what we mean by the grammar translation method. So, for the traditional teachers of English, it was integral part of language curriculum. Hence, students were taught all about articles, prepositions and conditional clauses, etc. Moreover, development of language skills and structure of language can be taught scientifically and systematically. The other day I was speaking to you that never try to find a logic behind the language, because language is for communication. And why we are emphasizing on the grammar portion? Because we are not the native speaker of this language. So, we have to first study the grammar portion, what are the conditional clauses and what are the preposition and how to use that preposition or article or adjective in a particular sentence. So, after learning the grammar portion, there are less possibility that one will not commit the errors, because we need that our students must learn how to read the language without errors and how to write the language without errors. And moreover, development of language skills and structure of language can be taught scientifically and systematically. Linguistics is a systematic study of knowledge and theory. So, we have to see scientifically, and these days we are talking about functional language and communicative approach. When I am talking about functional language, it goes against the learning of the grammar. When we are focusing on the functional language and our basic idea is just to convey our thought, our feelings, our emotions to the other listeners, then what is the role of grammar? So, we will discuss when these days in present scenario we are focusing, we are emphasizing on the functional language and communicative approach. It is being felt that knowledge of grammar may not be necessary for one to communicate in a language without knowing grammar. So, try to understand, try to go behind the line. When one opinion is there, when we are focusing on functional language, then what is the role of grammar? My dear listeners, when one is not familiar to a particular language, so it becomes essential for one to know the grammar portion. Later on, after knowing or having a mastery over the grammar portion, one can move towards the functional or communicative aspect, but at earlier stages one need to know the grammar portion. And some of the other arguments against teaching of grammar are, most of the time it is said that in regarding the learning grammar, whatever is learnt not applied. For example, in the beginning we tell the junior students that how the will and shall, use of will and shall will be differentiated, where we have to use will and where we have to use shall. And later on, after learning the all the grammar portion, when one is just communicating to the other person in a flow, then only the word of la is heard, no clarity of will or shall. So, this kind of opinion are given by the persons who are against the more and more learning of the rules of grammar, because it is said that whatever is learned, it is not applied, and learners do not get ideas and feelings. Why we are not so much fluent at speaking English language, because it is taught as a second language. Because what happens when a child is taught in grammar translation method, what happens, the ideas and feelings in the individual's mind come in Hindi, then one tries to translate those ideas from Hindi to English, and it takes the time, and one comes to know that the other person is not so much having so much flow in speaking, and that's why the ideas and feelings, they get break up, and grammatical analysis break up the unity of thoughts. When one is not so much familiar with the rules or with the fluency of the language, what happens when one tries to analyze the grammatically, what happens, the flow of the thoughts is break up, and one is not able to speak with a flow, with a fluency. So, the domains of English language are three, that is spellings, punctuation and grammar can be covered through studying grammar, and linguistic, cognitive and social aspect of English language development program can be seen reflected as its importance, and vocabulary can be enhanced through learning grammar. If one is not the native speaker of English language, what will happen? One has to know the grammar portion, what do we mean by that participle, and what are the tenses, what is the structural aspect, because semantic aspect or semantic understanding is possible when one is aware with the structural aspect. So, it is important to know the grammar portion. There are different types of grammar, and broadly speaking there are two types of grammar. One is the prescriptive, we call it traditional grammar also, and we call it formal grammar also, and the other one, the second one, is the descriptive or functional grammar. Always there is a controversy, and it has rather become a debatable issue whether to use traditional formal grammar or we have to focus on the functional aspect, functional language. So, before we try to conclude and we try to understand what actually is the importance of the grammar, we will have to understand in detail what is the prescriptive grammar and what is the descriptive grammar. Later on we will be talking about various approaches how to teach grammar, and by the time I hope what is the role of grammar, what is the importance of grammar and why study grammar, and how the grammar and its importance has been defined by the other grammarian or the other educationists must be clear to my listeners. Thank you. We will be discussing later on the other approaches and types of grammar in detail.
Thank you, ma'am, for this session. Dear friends, here we will stop for a little break and will join you after a little break. But before this, I would remind you that if you have any questions regarding this ongoing session, you can call us on our toll-free number, that is 1800-110-430. We'll meet after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, friends. We are going with the today's lecture, that is teaching of grammar. I would request ma'am to please continue with the lecture. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Simaji. Hello friends, let us continue with the types of grammar. We were talking about that there are two types of grammar basically. First we will discuss what do we mean by prescriptive grammar. According to a prescriptive grammarian, grammar consists of a set of notions about the correct usage of a language. He or she would assert that people must say it is I and not it is me, because what is the correct usage? If in particular in depth we want to follow the correct notions, then we have to for example, I have taken very simple example. Sometime we say it is me, who is there, we say it is me, whereas it is not it is me, rather one has to say it is I. So the prescriptive grammarians, they say we have to follow the set of notions, and the prescriptive grammarians believe in the doctrine of rules as laid down by traditional grammar. They believe in recommending how people should speak, because if they do not recommend one set notion, then every user, every speaker will be speaking the language according to her or own notions, because we have to learn language as it is suggested or recommended by the authority, not as one feel that it should be like this. If for example, we take the example of two words put or but, one cannot say that if put put, then but should be but, because we pronounce them in a different manner. It means, by this example I want to say that prescriptive grammarians have set or recommended the set notions how people should speak. So people are not going to behind or find the logic behind the language, rather they have to adhere to those rules, because language cannot be taught and language cannot be learned as one thinks that it should be like this, because how the grammarians have set the notion one has to follow. So this is all about prescriptive grammar. And when we talk about descriptive grammar, the descriptive grammarians believe in the doctrine of general uses. For example, she or he prefers who to whom in the objective form in question and does not mind using badly I feel badly. So if they use the wrong notion or the wrong words, then the descriptive grammarians say that it hardly bothers them, because what for language is for communication, and the idea is conveyed whether one is using the word badly or I feel badly, but the idea is conveyed. That is when we talk about functional aspect of the language. So there is the controversy and it has become debatable, but we have to follow the set rules of grammar before we come to the functional aspect. First, one has to be aware with the grammar portion, and the doctrine of uses believes in the doctrine of appropriateness. A consistent use of the doctrine means that every newcomer to a speech community needs to learn how appropriately an utterance is used and how that appropriateness is decided. When we were talking about the linguistic principles, we just discussed about the principle of appropriateness and principle of accuracy, how that accuracy and how that appropriateness is set. It is set by the authority, by the grammarians, and the speakers and the users who are not aware with this its depth knowledge, they have to follow that rules to be the appropriate and to be the for the correct use. So in recent years there has been a rethinking about grammar teaching, how the grammar should be taught and should be learned. There has been a rethinking, while as a reaction to the structural approach, the learners in a communicative classroom were expected not to puzzle their heads with grammar. There are two approaches. One is structural approach and the another is communicative approach. Earlier we used to focus on structural approach, but these days when we talk about the communicative classroom, then the followers of the communication or communicative approach are of the viewpoint, then why to puzzle our head with grammar, why to get ourselves involved in learning the complicated rules of grammar, because the structural approach sets the notion that these are the structures, these are the words, and these words can be used with consonants, and these are the words which can be used by the vowels, and what are the diphthong, and how the words are set silent, why a particular word is silent in a particular word. This is set by the authority, by the grammarians, and opposite to it on the other hand, the followers of the communicative approach, they say why to puzzle our head with the grammar. So again there has been a rethinking about grammar teaching, but about learning a foreign language we have to know about its grammar portion, and it is being increasingly accepted that language learning is essentially learning how grammar functions in the achievement of meaning. Try to understand when we talk about comprehension or understanding or any meaning. So, how that objective can be achieved? What is that objective? Meaning by understanding the meaning of a particular word. How one is able to get the target fulfilled when one is aware about the grammar functions. So, it is wrong on the part of the persons who say that why to puzzle their heads with learning grammar, because if we are not aware with the grammar portion, then one will not be able to use the language in a correct manner, because when a child is using the mother tongue at home, the child is using the word book, pen, table, chair, or in Hindi mej, kursi, and after spending the time in the school, the teacher tells that these are the proper noun, these are the class nouns, and but in case of English language, when a child enters in the school, the language teacher tells the child that this is the proper noun, these are adjective, and later on the child is taught how to use those words. So, when we are to learn the foreign language, that is the English language, we have to be aware with the grammar functions. But instead of isolated sentences which were mostly used for drill and practice in the structural approach, the emphasis is now on providing suitable context to make the learners realize the communicative value of grammar in the very achievement of meaning. See, when earlier to it, few seconds before, when I was talking to you that there has been a rethinking about the teaching of grammar. Of course, we cannot avoid with learning of grammar, but as the learner get monotonous in learning about structural approach, it is said or it is suggested that while learning through structural approach, natural setting or natural situations should be created, so that the child in learning the grammar do not get monotonous and do not get boredom. Rather, the exercise of learning grammar becomes interesting for the child. Later on, I will be discussing with you how to organize these grammar activities in the classroom. Actually, my dear friend, it depends on the efficiency and passion and hard work of the language teacher, how much interestingly or how much the teacher can motivate the students to learn the grammar. So, before going to the class, earlier day, the teacher has to practice, the teacher has to make the exercise at home, that these are the special exercises. I have to carry these exercises to the classroom, so that I can make more and more interest or motivation on the part of my students. Now, the question arises, what English teachers should do? Should they teach grammar or not? Or with the introduction of direct method, grammar is fast disappearing from school curriculum. Later on, after this teaching of grammar, I will be talking to you about the various methods how to teach grammar. There is always a debate or controversy or different opinion when we talk about two methods, that is direct method and grammar translation method. Earlier we were taught by the teacher by translating each and every word in Hindi, but these days we emphasize on direct method. What is that? For the time being, I am not going in detail of the methods. For the time being, I would make it clear that in translation method, suppose we have to tell the students at a very junior level that this is a book, we will translate that ye ek pustak hai. But in direct method, we will bring a book in our hand, will show the object, and we will tell the students, I have an object in my hand and we call it a book. So or if the object is of a nature that we cannot bring it directly, then we can use it through the chart or the other teaching aids, or we can bring the model of that object. So this way, when we focus or when we emphasize on direct method, grammar is fast disappearing from school curriculum. So these days it has been observed that child is speaking English fluently, but the use of grammar portion is wrongly used. So it is my suggestion, if a child is speaking English, but before that, before using those words, grammar should be clear and the wrong notion should not be used by a lover of the language who wants to teach English or who wants to learn English. And with this, I'll talk about importance of grammar. We need grammar to avoid ambiguity, imprecision, unintelligible speech or writing. Question arises, if we can convey our idea through direct method, through functional language, then what is the need of using grammar? There is the need of grammar, there is the importance of grammar. As a person of or as a learner of English language, I would focus on this, that we need grammar. For what? So that there is no ambiguity. Sometimes a word is or a sentence is used which has its two meaning. So if one is aware, one is familiar with the grammar portion, that ambiguity will not take place and the right meaning, right understanding will be there on the part of the learner. So our speech or our writing, it should be intelligible to the other reader or the listener. Whatever we speak, it should be clear to our listeners, to our reader. So it depends on our efficiency, how much clearly we are using the words in writing or in speaking. And scientific attitude about language can be developed through study of grammar. Who does not want to study the grammar or does not make or does not put in much efforts, try to criticize this attitude that why to puzzle our head with the grammar. But my dear friends, study of grammar is also scientific. There are the reasons, there are the laws, there are the principles and maxims. One has to develop his or her attitude towards learning the language through study of grammar. And further, about its importance, students can learn to assimilate the correct patterns of language with the help of grammar, and knowledge of grammar can be helpful in developing learners' mental abilities of reasoning and correct observation. When I talk time and again about the imitation of the language, for imitating the correct model, we need the correct models before us, meaning by our language teacher particularly should teach the language in a correct manner, because we set as a teacher ourselves a model and students or the listeners will follow, will imitate, so that correct model should be presented before the students, and mind it, the native speakers are the correct models. So more and more opportunities should be provided to the students so that they can listen the native speakers through audio cassettes or through exchange program of the teachers. I will be talking about these aspects later on. I know there are various approaches to teach grammar. How we can teach grammar? Earlier to it, I talked to you about two types of grammar, that is prescriptive grammar and descriptive grammar, and there are various approaches. Formal explanation of grammatical rule is the first approach. This is also known as traditional method. Here a book containing the rule of grammar is used. How the students come to know that these are the rule? There are the grammar books which contain the laws. There are several grammar books which presents the rule of English grammar. For example, Wren and Martin, Nasfield, etc. These rules are prescriptive. We will suggest to the students that go through the books which is written by Wren and Martin, and you have to follow the set rules. Then you can become a fluent speaker. And connotation of the words have been changed in the present scenario. Some of these rules are no longer in use. For example, if I take a word fakir, how the meaning or connotation of the words after a long use gets its meaning in a changed form. For example, earlier we used to use the word fakir for a saint person, and these days if one is shabbily dressed, we say or we comment, why you are dressed up like a fakir, are you in a melancholy or sad mood? So see, my dear friends, how the word fakir has changed its connotation by the over and over use. And mastery of the rules of grammar will surely make our learners veterans in grammar, but find difficulty in communicating. The other approach is practice of common grammatical patterns. Here practice of usage is emphasized. Look at the table below. The examples are given: boys, girls, singing, reading and dancing. So this is a substitution table. Two sentences, two words, boys and girls, can be combined with these three words. So it can be multiplied, and students can make the multiplying sentences. When we talk about the composition aspect later on, I will tell you how the substitution table, which is the example of here before you, this substitution table are of maximum use for the students when they practice on the composition, guided composition and free composition. So regarding the guided composition, this substitution table is of maximum use. And the third is the situational teaching. I discussed with you earlier that when we talk about structural approach, it becomes monotonous for the students. So we have to create a situation for like role playing technique, etc., so that the learning of grammar portion should not become a boring exercise for the students. Here the learners are provided with the situations to speak which enhances their efficiency. For example, you have taken the students to visit bank the previous day, then asking them to create a scene of bank and then talk to each other by choosing their role. You will take them to the bank and you have to teach the working of the bank, and next day you will ask all the furniture should be arranged by you of the classroom like a bank situation, and you yourself can choose the role. It will become an interesting exercise for the students. They will choose their role and they will use the new words, and it will just break the monotony of the classroom. And the next method is inductive method. What is inductive method? Always students find themselves confused in inductive method and deductive method. Try to be more clear. In inductive method, the teacher present example before students and they notice how the concept work for these examples. No explanation of the concept is given beforehand. First the example will be given and then students will be asked to induce the rule, that what can be the rule behind this. You give the example and ask the students to frame the more and more sentences, it will become an interesting affair also, and this is the method which is preferred these days. Students learn to recognize the rules of grammar in a natural manner, because when we talked about the linguistic principles, I spoke to you that one of the linguistic principle is teach the word in a natural manner, and that was known as the principle of naturalness. So, when you teach your students with inductive method and you first tell them the examples and ask them to find out the rules, it will create a natural setting, and discovering grammar and visualizing how these rules work in a sentence makes the retention easier. If we teach something, student listen and they forget, and there is no retention and there is no transfer of learning, then there is no use of teaching. Teaching for the sake of teaching or grammar for the sake of grammar only has no use. Whatever we teach, later on I will be discussing with you the behavioral objectives, meaning by whatever goals we set, it should be realized and it should be fulfilled by the students. That is what we mean by retention. So, it means when we try to teach the students with the inductive method, retention will be more easy, and this approach has its own advantages. It breaks the monotony. I was talking to you that there will be no monotony if we teach students this way, and teaching made more interesting by performing actions in the classroom. Here functional aspect is also kept in mind, and through this students' power of thinking, reasoning, assimilation and initiation is stimulated. Of course, I spoke to you that we are not to find the logic behind the words, why a particular word is named or particular object is named by this name, but we have to develop on the other side the thinking and reasoning of the students. When through learning they try to find the thinking or reasoning, it will make the memory permanent, otherwise they will forget, because most of the time in counseling session and in teaching the teachers, these problems we have to face. Students they say or they complain that we forget easily and we are not able to concentrate or listen attentively. So, what can be the basic reason? Reason is that the material which is being presented before the students is not of their interest, and the examples are not having chosen according to their standards. So, it depends on the efficiency or passion of the teacher, how teacher work hard. It has making an impression on the students' contextual memory, because we want that our students should have the ability to transfer the learning, what they have learned in the classroom, it should be transferred from them to the situations of day to day life. And after knowing this inductive method, we focus on deductive method. Deductive method is just opposite to the inductive method. Earlier we used to teach students by deductive method, but these days we prefer inductive method. So, let us see what is deductive method. Here the teacher first tells the rules of grammar, and then students apply those rules in different situations of learning. The teacher gives an in-depth explanation of grammatical. What is the basic disadvantage and demerit of this method, because if you keep on telling all the time the rules of the grammar, students will find themselves puzzled in learning the rule of the grammar, and they will not be able to speak language with a good flow. And concepts, before they encounter some grammatical concepts in their own writing, this method has its own advantages and disadvantages. On one hand, it saves time, on the other hand, it brings monotony. If we are teaching the students with the the deductive method, it will save the time. They will easily understand that how this rule has been used in a particular sentence, and how on the basis of this rule I can frame the sentences. But it will bring the monotony. Then the grammar games. Most of us do not have very pleasant memories of grammar classes during our school days, but no one can deny the importance of grammar. We know that grammar teaching is covert, not overt. We have to make it enjoyable, and there are various advantages of grammar games. Let us discuss. Through games, students are motivated and their interest can be sustained. A healthy feeling of competition can be inculcated among students. Games can be organized at any level: primary, elementary and secondary. And in all the areas like listening, speaking, reading and writing, practice through games can be provided. In the process of playing grammar games, teacher can observe them and their error can be pointed out and corrected. And following grammar activities can be helpful. Divide the class into two groups. Ask one group to choose any word from it and make sentence. Then the other group will follow the procedure. For example, you ask the students how to make use of either or how to make use of neither or nor, and you give the words though, if, but, since, neither, nor, because. He came to meet me though it was raining. So, for example, I have given you the example of the word though, and this way they will frame the sentences on the basis of the words given by you. And use of simple present tense for habitual actions. Honesty is the best policy. Truth always wins. Milk is white. And ask the students to form sentences on the basis within 5 minutes. Whosoever makes maximum sentences can win the game. Number of statement depicting various actions can be written on slips of paper, and students can be asked to pick up a slip and act out of the command. You are writing on chalkboard, you are trying to get change from your pocket, you are trying to control the classes. For these are the examples. And some suggestions: grammar lessons should begin with language. It must correlate with speech, in which a sentence is a unity whole with reading. After the students have listened to, try to guide them to deduce the pattern that we want them to use. Lastly, grammar should not be taught as an intellectual exercise, but the aim should be to make them skillful users of language. And age and general standard of students should be kept in mind. Teachers should be particular about correction work. Teach grammar for communication and not grammar for its own sake. We are not interested in producing grammarians. We should help the learners to communicate effectively. We want our learners to acquire knowledge of language and not knowledge about language. They should be able to talk about knowledge of noun, etc. Hence, let us not frighten our learners with excessive use of grammatical labels. An analogy might help you to understand this better. If you want to learn driving, it is not necessary for you to know everything about each part of the car. Teach grammar as discourse, not isolated sentences. And I hope with this, everyone whosoever is listening can be aware then that what are the various approaches to teach grammar, and how these days we prefer inductive approach of teaching grammar. And I have discussed with you some of the exercises, how a teacher can organize these exercises in the classroom, because lastly I would conclude that we are not interested in producing the veterans who can speak grammar, rather teach grammar for communication and try to make it an interesting affair. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Indeed, it was a very informational lecture. Dear friends, you must have learned a lot from this lecture, and we at CEC are always ready with such informational and educative lectures for you. So stay tuned with us. Thank you.